Well, tonight, the chief executive of Delex Finance, Ken Thompson, has described the rate cut by the Bank of Ghana as not enough to deal with the liquidity challenges in the banking and non-banking sector. Now, in a surprise move last week, the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana cut its policy rate by 150 basis points in a bid to support the economy. Chief Executive of Delex Finance, Ken Thompson, has been speaking to my colleague, Philip Namfuri.
Unfortunately, our central bank is in a bit of a tight spot, especially since we're coming just out of money being provided to support financial institutions that collapsed. So it's not able to do as much as probably it should. And I don't think those that are there are not mindful of the things that need to do. Because what we need is liquidity. So unless you provide liquidity, you haven't started. I mean, let's go through some of the things they've tried to do. They've reduced the monetary policy rate. That monetary policy rate has no bearing on real interest rates. The government itself is borrowing at about 20%. So at the worst possible case, I'll give my money to the government. They've reduced some reserves that the commercial banks are allowed to hold. So technically, the commercial banks have more money to lend. Commercial banks never lend to SMEs. They never will lend to my barber. They'll never lend to my watch seller. They won't. They never did. They will never will. They are not interested. They don't have the capacity to do it. So if really you want to lend to those people, you need to write to institutions that are one step below.
Institutions like yours.
Yes, maybe finance companies, savings and loans companies, microfinance companies. That's, if you really want to help those at the bottom who are the most vulnerable, then that's where the money should go. But I also don't think that we have the infrastructure, and we'll come to, I mean, while we are suffering from this a lot, we don't have the infrastructure to be able to transmit the money to the institutions and monitor. That's the problem. So the central bank's in the bind. A, it doesn't have a lot of money. B, there's no infrastructure to do it. Who do you give it to? How do you track them? Who are they? We don't even have an ID system. We don't have an address system. You take a case to court, it takes 5, I've got cases in court that have taken 7 years. 7 years in court! And of course you're going to suffer for it. So they are trying, but coming off the back of this banking crisis, where they have to provide liquidity, on top of this, it's a problem. What the economy needs is liquidity. If you take economies all over the world, and of course we've got to use example what people have done, is in some countries they're actually paying up to 80% of the wages of vulnerable employees. In America, they're going to as far as giving everybody $1,000 check. Why? They want to make people spend. That's the challenge. That is a challenge. Or, you pump money into the system. But unless you provide liquidity, it's a non-starter.
All right, Philip Namfuri joins me in studio with more on that discussion with Ken Thompson. Always trust Ken Thompson to be passionate about issues such as this. So he says it's not enough, the policy rate cut.
Darrow, we've listened to his submissions and you realize that even last week on PM Express Business, two of my guests, I know to a champion and Professor Sibe, they all agreed that it was a step in the right direction. But Professor Sibe, like this, said we will need more rate cuts. Now, the problem Ken raises is what we call the transmission mechanism. How does the rate cut move into the lending rates? And how is it going to affect you and I, our aggregate demand? Because you want to give the banks more cash, essentially, so that you and I can borrow at better terms. Then we can go out there and spend. Because there's going to come a time where there will be some constraints in liquidity. As opposed to advanced markets, US, UK, where these rate cuts and quantitative easing, bond buying programs will work to a degree. Ours here, there are some constraints, and that's what Ken is highlighting. When you cut monetary policy rates, you are affecting the universal commercial banks first. But institutions such as Ken's institution, finance houses, savings and loans companies, microfinance institutions, that monetary policy rate transmission doesn't really percolate down there. That was his argument. So how do we ensure that there's liquidity with such institutions that provide to the masses in the Ghanaian economy? That's what he was trying to raise in there.
So what does he suggest?
Well, a mix of issues. He gave some fiscal issues in some part of the interview, which in our subsequent bulletins we'll let our viewers and listeners be aware of. But on the monetary side, remember that we just come from this banking sector crisis. We've pumped in billions of cedis. We have another crisis on our hands, not financial, but health that has speculated into economic and financial. What does the Bank of Ghana do? Do we have the muscle to also print and put money in the system? What are the effects of that? The inflationary effects, etc., effects on our exchange rate. So that's why he says at the beginning that Bank of Ghana is in a tight position. What can we do? I'm sure in the coming...
Yeah. I guess that's a big question. What can we do? We can't be like the US that has cut it to 0.2% or the UK 0.1%. What can we do?
Well, apart from this rate cut, there were other measures that they instituted. The minimum requirement, the reserve requirement ratio, and then the payments on loans that may go bad or may be non-performing. But I think the key issue there is getting in liquidity. How do we ensure that people are flush with cash to stimulate demand and then prop up buying of goods and services? Because if we're to go into a full lockdown and some companies don't work, etc., can you imagine the effects? It's sometimes unimaginable. Yeah. So sometimes, I mean, nobody saw this coming. Economic models can predict. You realize that it's quite even difficult to explain how this thing is going to be like.
Okay, and you talk about the fact that nobody saw this coming, and government has tried at least to reduce the policy rate or cut it to, is it 14.5%?
Yes.
Yes. Let's talk about, I mean, we're just 2 weeks into this. We don't know for how long this is going to last. Where do you see our economy headed?
Well, Darryl, I would start off with the people I've discussed with. Last week, even Ken Thompson, he proposed some measures on the fiscal side, things that will be cost to businesses, SNET contributions, pay as you earn, etc., should be delayed for some time. Give these institutions some amount of cash they need to ensure that their employees, I beg your pardon, have something to fall back on. On the monetary side, we need to ensure that the financial institutions in the system have some amount of liquidity. How that's going to happen, I think it will be best left to the Bank of Ghana officials.
I mean, earlier in the day, I spoke with some players in the hospitality industry. They had a long list of interventions, and I'm thinking that various industries are also going to be seeking interventions. Do we have the muscle?
For me, I would say no, but I would say yes also. No, in the sense that if you look at the numbers that are available to us on paper, we don't. Our fiscal constraints, we don't. Bank of Ghana's reserves, are we going to pump all of it into people's businesses? I don't think that's the way to go. But can government devise some creative means to ensure that some key companies in the economy are propped up, some key industries? That's why I think it will have to be targeted at certain key strategic players, even within the industry. So even let's take aviation. You can't sort out everybody. Sort out the key players. If you take banking, sort out the key stakeholders, because everybody's cash is in the bank. So what are we going to do? There's so many things that we need to think of, but I think let's put the best in our leaders and then hope that they come out with good measures. And
it's just not Ghana's headache, right? It's the world's headache. We had the OECD say that it's going to take a very long time for the global economy to recover from this shock.
But then they have more room in terms of their fiscals, in terms of their monetary, well-advanced economies, not dependent on commodities. Look at us, Darryl. If you factor all these things inside, it's a very dire situation. So that's why we need...
Now you're making me sad.
We need innovative ways to surmount these challenges.
Right, it's not a laughing matter. Philip Namfuri, thanks very much indeed for your analysis.